this slide. I go through to the end. But
Could you explain that other revenue again?
the other revenue, it's kind of the revenue that doesn't fit into any of these other categories. Examples would be any reimbursements. This is where our SCE solar initiative comes back in. Any rebates, some admin fees for some of the other franchises, and some sales. If we have to print out any records for someone and they have to pay for it, this is where it goes.
Is it tough to predict this one?
That one's a little more difficult. We kind of look at a trend line from the last few years, but it can vary a little bit. Reimbursements don't happen every year for the same item.
I had a question on the sales and use.
Yes.
In 1914-15, we had, at the same time, we had 56% in, and it looks like to me we have, wait a minute, where am I? We have 29%. Is there something that was different about that
Yes.
year that made us have so much more money than this year?
Not that year in particular. It's this year that's different. As I
Okay.
said, the triple flip is ending. What the triple flip was, we got 3/4 of that 1% in monthly revenue. The other quarter came with property tax.
Right.
Now that has ended, and so we're going to start getting that all 1% monthly. So where they had true-ups, or not true-ups, we're getting smaller on the 1/4% that hits all at once. So if you look, the budget, 3.2 million compared to 3.2 million, we're still going to hit that number. It's just going to come later with the wind down of triple flip.
That was the biggest difference, is the one I saw was that, and the franchise, 5% and 25%. Somebody paid a whole lot more
Someone paid early.
early.
Typically, we
All
get
right.
those in March and April.
Okay. All right.
You see our big spike there in December. That's when we get our property tax allocation. Looking at this, once again, just a graphical representation of what we've been discussing of last year versus this year. Let's see. And this is a comparison to the trend, well, not the trend line, the baseline, which would be about 58% of the year, so 58% of the revenues. This is a department budget. I need to preface this one with saying the slide that is in the packet, the actual line didn't update, so I've updated it. What you see on the screen is the correct numbers as far as the actual.
Big difference, huh?
Yeah, it was pulling through November instead of through January. So what you see on the screen is the correct. Once again, going with year-end estimates. These were developed by the departments to see
Do you have
where
a
they would
printout
end.
of that?
What's that?
Do you have a printout of that we can have?
I can make a printout.
I would appreciate
If you
it.
would,
Yeah.
send us that.
Absolutely.
Email it to us, I guess.
You
Yeah.
know what I'd like to see on all these is dates, too. When I go back and try to go back and look and see where we are, if you could say the year-end date was of this and put it on there.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
On all of the forms, I'd like to see a date on those so I can go back and look, not just last year, but previous years.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Let's see. So comparing to year-end estimates, you can see we're going to end the year at 14 million expended. We're currently at just under 7 million, which is about 50% of the year-end estimate. So we're still a little bit under if the baseline's 58%. Excuse me. Some of those that are over the budget, advertising and promotion, we spent that all at the first of the year for the Petria Festival. 60%, let's see, 60% in finance. That's due to we have to pay for our audits. Those are one-time costs that come and aren't spread out throughout the year. MIS, which is IT, at 59%. Once again, that's for licensing fees that don't happen during the year. It's one time during the year. And public safety at 55%, still below the baseline.
What is City Hall?
City Hall, that is the maintenance for this building. We have one maintenance person. I don't know if he's full-time here or not, but that's everything involved for the maintenance. Cleaning, that's your power, that's your gas, that's everything to keep this building open. Repairs, yeah. Further questions on this slide? Graphical representation. You see in most cases, we're below where we were last year. Parks and Rec, Community Development are the only ones that are up a little bit. And again, with the baseline, 58% linear representation.
Well, go back to that. Why is public safety so high on that stuff?
Just their gross amount compared to the rest of the budget. If you look at the linear representation, they're right there at that 58% of their budget. But as far as pure dollars, they're the largest department in the general fund.
Maybe I'm reading wrong. I read we spent 100% already.
No.
Over 100%.
For the bar,
The blue line, the blue bar shows over 100%.
the blue bar is for the left side. That's millions of dollars, 3.5 million on the left side.
Oh, it's not the right side.
No, right side's for the linear.
Okay, right side, okay, so the left side's for the blue is for the left side, and the baseline and
Budget are on
is
the right side.
right side,
Yep.
okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah, they're not over budget yet. Looking at cash flow, we began the year with $1.6 million in cash. You can see the inflows and outflows. Ending balance at the end of January is $1.8 million, so $225,000 in the positive there. And then this one I added in. This is the pro forma based on the year-end estimates. So we began at $1.6 million. We have inflows of $11.8 million, outflows of $12.1. Operations net cash, those are operations that are the transfers in and transfers out. Nope, that's the subtotal, sorry. Transfers in, transfers out is the net cash other activities. And so what you see is a reduction in the cash balance to just under $1.3 million. If you remember during our August budget adjustment, we were taking $300,000 of carryover Measure L to fund those 4 police officers and $51,000 of leftover Prop 172 to cover some of the police safety training. So that was a net negative of about $300,000, just over $300,000. And so that's represented here in this pro forma based on year-end estimates where we'll be at the end of the year. Any questions on that one? Looking at the other major funds, we have the gas tax, year-to-date revenue of $593,000 and year-to-date expenditures of $860,000, 15% and 25% respectively. Transit, we approved the submittal of the TDA applications today during consent calendar, so we'll be getting the money from Kern Cog soon to peg into that revenue for the operational side. There's some capital in there for I believe, the new garage. That's reflected in there as far as revenue. Wastewater, we've got the first allocation of property tax. It looks like it was what was budgeted. I'll have to check that out. I don't know that we're getting more in there.
102.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check that one out. That's what we received. We may have underestimated the revenue. Expenditures, we still have the We spent 1.1 million of 7.2. Self-insurance, these are our claims and any separation of pay or separation of personnel pays. Fleet, we're about identical in expenditures and revenue. And grant operations, we still have some 1B money that's sitting there, working on plans to spend that. And that is it. Please, any questions? Let me ask.
You know what I'd like to see? When we talk about allocated and unallocated and all that, I would like to see a list of all the bank balances that we have for what. You know, you're showing us the general fund figure,
Yes.
but we don't know. I know we got some unallocated tab money. I would like to know how much that. I would like to know. I'm on the hospital board, and we get a list of all of our monies every month.
Yeah, and typically we have a quarterly report that shows our bank balances that we bring to council for approval. We did in December. It wasn't December, it may have been November for the first quarter. So let me see where we're at on that, and that'll show our bank accounts. I mean, pretty much what
Because
our
I'd like
bank.
to know how much money is left in unallocated tab, how much is in allocated tab.
And I know for the
how much
tab,
general fund-
we're
every-
coming
you know.
back at the next council meeting with the tab project listing and balances and where we're at on that. But
Can you throw, wastewater, all those funds?
That's what I'd like to see when we asked last time. We'd like to see that, the
an actual
total.
fund balance
Yes,
on those
where
ones.
we are.
Fund-
What is-
I can
what
do
is
that.
Where we are
expected to-
fund-wise on everything.
Cash
Yeah.
balance on those.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment on this item?
Stan Rapora. I'd like to go to page 8, which is the year-to-date department budgets, and that's budget expenditures, I think. Down at the bottom, it looks like we're going to have a year-end final expenditure of right at $14 million, but we were planning on spending 14.7 approximately. And look at the numbers, it looks like we are under budget about $670,000. Am I interpreting that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, assuming that that is correct, and it looks like also that the police department is under budget about $450K as well. So I think Chief Strand needs to be complimented and commended for controlling his budget. And that all looks good. The comment I was going to make until a minute ago anyway was that the money that isn't being spent, my feeling is that money needs to be rolled back into the Measure L carryover money, because it appeared, at least from this sheet, that we actually had authorized or budgeted more money than we needed, much of that coming out of Measure L. That is, we didn't need to put as much Measure L money into the general fund as opposed to the public works. And so my feeling is that so that excess money doesn't go into general fund reserve, it needs to go back into the Measure L carryover.
You're talking that 450K,
The
right?
well, not just the 450K,
But the difference between the
but
two?
but the 670K.
Yeah.
Because obviously the general fund, even though only 450K comes from police, we also authorized money in the general fund that didn't need to be, and that was and because of that, there wasn't enough money to fund enough of the police out of the general fund, so we supplemented with Measure L. But any of that money that's excess, in my mind, should go into the Measure L carryover, because otherwise all it does is, I'm assuming, drops into the general fund reserve, And of course, it was never the intent, at least I don't think, of Measure L to fund general fund reserve. All right?
Well, the one problem I have with that, Stan, and I understand what you're saying, but if we're really coming in 600,000 below budget, our cash flow analysis
That's going to be my next
doesn't
question.
show that. It
Yeah.
shows it's going the other way.
Yeah.
Well, that was why I said it.
Yeah,
Up
okay.
until I heard, because I didn't understand those two sheets of paper in the back of the cash flow until it was just explained by Mr. Staley. In fact, that is the next question I have. I didn't realize that page 11 was year-to-date, and even though it does say year-to-date at the top, I guess it didn't sink through. And the word pro forma, I looked that up in the dictionary, and quite frankly, it didn't tell me that was the year end. But in any event, I didn't understand the difference between the ending balance in the one case is 1.9 million, and in the other case it's 1.3 million. There's like $550,000 difference, and frankly the cash flow on both of them start at 1.6. In one case, our ending balance, that is, I'm assuming that's sort of like cash or reserve or whatever you want to call it, went up. In the next case, even, and I didn't understand it, to be quite honest. Now, and since we're underspending, we're underspent. I don't understand why the ending balance is now down. I would think that the ending balance should have
Been
gone
at
up.
1.8, yeah.
I don't understand.
Well, the 1.8 is as of January 31st.
Correct.
And the 1.3 is projected for June 30th. But that still doesn't explain how we could be 600,000 under budget and go down and
Still
still
have
up.
money, yeah.
So I guess we got a $600,000 problem here.
Well, the $600,000, that's at the end of the year. We still have different timing for money as well, or for incoming revenues, as well as a different timing for outgoing expenditures. And so this is looking at our estimations through the whole year rather than just 7 months. Because as you see in these graphs, the money doesn't come in all at once.
Well, I understand that part. But Stan's point is, the budget for the year was 14.7, and your year-end estimate is 14.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the revenue also looks like it's coming low 100K. If you go back on to page 4, revenue is coming in 100 low, but since we're spending 700K less, you would still expect to have a net increase of 600K. I mean, that's, it doesn't, I couldn't, of course, I didn't know what I was looking at when I first looked at page 11 and 12. But I'm confused.
I'm confused by what he's asking, so.
If we're coming in $600,000 below budget,
Budget.
Yes.
we should have that 600,000 somewhere.
Somewhere.
This is what we're talking about with the rollover purchase orders. We approved a budget last year, and I don't know what was done as far as year-end numbers last year, but some of those expenditures, not expenditures, but allocations that were committed last year weren't spent last year. They roll over because they were committed. So the budget, after the original budget, goes up a little bit for those outstanding encumbrances.
Can we have those figures?
Yeah, I don't have them with me, but it was approximately $500,000. There was building permits. There's a couple other things. That's why when we do the year-end estimate this year, we take that all into account. We may not spend all of this that's in the year-end estimate expenditure, because it's supposed to also include any encumbrances that may not be spent this year, that are committed this year, that we spend next year. So we're trying to get it all inclusive, so we have a real good starting point for our budget, so that this isn't a surprise next year.
It seems to me, though, that when we're generating, let's say, this year's budget, if we didn't take into account the monies that were already committed from last year, we could have a balanced budget for this year, but still go in the hole because we didn't know that there were already monies out. And so it seems to me that the budget process that we go through is.
And that's what we're trying to capture and correct with this.
There's more information that needs to go into the budget process, I think is what we're saying.
And that's what we're
Because
implementing.
otherwise, nobody knows if you're going to have a balanced budget or not.
Yeah, no, your point's well taken. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things we're going to try and correct, because in the previous years, the budget gets approved, and then there's two things. There's the approved budget, actual budget, and these spreadsheets, at least in the system spreadsheets, these aren't system spreadsheets, but the system spreadsheets show the adjusted budget. And the adjusted budget comes about after the council's approved the budget before July 1. That usually takes 2 or 3 months to close out the previous year. So they don't know what was really required, in other words, expenses that were carried over until about the end of September. So in about October, finance, and that's about the time the auditors come too, as I recall, the finance department does an adjusted budget where they bring in these carryover expenses, and then some of the departments are actually in shock because they say, well, wait a minute, the council approved this, the finance has to tell them, yes, they did, but we had expenses that were carried over that are being taken out of your current year, and we don't want to do that. What we're going to try and work for is to take carryover balances as far as the cash reserves, and to take care of these carryover expenses. So when you approve a budget, that's the budget the departments can work with in the.
Well, yeah, and if finance adjusted the budget in September, October, we never saw the adjusted budget.
And I don't think that's ever come back to council the 10 years I've been here.
It's approved with the budget process. It's in the resolution that the carryovers.
Right, they give the
carry
discretion to take care of the carryovers, and when you do that, it can be an amount $500,000 sometimes.
And we try to whittle it down to items that aren't actually happening, but the
It
big
only
contract.
as my understanding, it's only returned to council in years when we don't have a cash balance
Correct.
Can we return it to council each time?
Yeah, we want it returned.
I would like to do that.
Sure.
So would we.
Well, golly gee,
And
yeah.
that brings up another point. In infrastructure committee, we discussed a few months ago about maybe contracting with Cal City or somebody else for building permits. And we were told that, well, we kind of want to stay with Kern County. They aren't billing us, and we owe a bunch of money, apparently. What is the status of that?
Ty, you can.
When I went back and looked, the last time we paid a bill was in 2012, and I believe it was for permits in 2010.
So we owe for 5 years in
No, because after 3 years, they can't bill us anymore. So anything after 3 years, we drop off.
So we owe for 3 years then.
And we're holding on the expense side 3 years that hasn't been billed in our budget.
How much is that? I've heard 400,000.
I think approximately 400,000, and that's
And where does that show in here?
Yeah.
That would be under community development, I believe. So it's not broken down individual. That's just part of their budget.
I want to see more.
Well,
I do.
Well, going back to page 8, where it shows that for this year's budget, ignoring carryover from last year, that we did budget I haven't heard anything that would make me believe that we didn't budget more Measure L money into the general fund than yeah, I'm sorry, let me make that positive statement. I believe we appropriated more Measure L funds for the general fund than was actually needed based upon page 8, and I would like to see any excess that didn't really have to be appropriated for this year to be returned to Measure L carryover. Does that make sense? And it's sort of independent of what page 11 and 12 say.
Well, I would think, Stan, on that, the Measure L committee should be reporting that to us. That's what the oversight committee should be.
Well, actually, I'm not
know
sure
that,
they
would they?
know that, well, under the best of all worlds, you're right, they should have that information.
Well,
But
I hope
don't-
so,
I
because
don't
that's,
see anybody from Measure
there's no
L
one
here
here from
tonight.
Measure L right now.
I
I mean, that's what they're designated to do.
Well, if they're given the information, then they can do it, but if they don't ask, and why would you ask? I mean, if I were on the Measure L committee, would I ask whether or not all the money that was appropriated for the police, was it actually spent? You know, I mean, my feeling is that there was more money appropriated from Measure L than the general fund needed, and that monies should be put back into the Measure L carryover. I mean, you raise a good point, but there's a lot of who knows.
Can we ask Measure L to look at that and make sure, Ty, when you met with them on Monday, were they aware of that at all?
They're working on the 14-15 report right now.
I know that,
So not the current year. But yeah, they look at carryover and all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we make sure when they meet next, what is it, then?
Well, I think
2
it's April
weeks?
4th.
Okay. When they meet again, can we make sure they understand that?
Yeah.
And they have that full information so we can get a good final report from them?
Sure.
Well, now, their report will only cover up through
To
the end of FY
Right.
15, so this will be next year's.
I understand that, but we want to make sure they're aware that
Oh, yes,
money exists.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, on my last page that I had some questions about, page 13,
My pages
year-to-date,
aren't numbered. so
Mine
tell me-
aren't numbered
Tell me
either,
which
so-
page is 13.
the next to last page, other funds.
Other funds.
Yeah,
okay.
I had to number them. Sorry about that. And by the way, it would be nice to actually, if there were page numbers on them. Yeah, the wastewater year-to-date, 6 months in, and now that might be 7 months in, but it's the same as the 6 months in for the wastewater. It's at 102%. And I think you mentioned you were going to look at that.
Yes.
Can you tell me of the 3.5 million that's already in, how much of that came from the Navy?
I can't off the top of my head.
You can't.
No.
Okay.
But we do have that number.
Could you get that number for me?
Absolutely.
Also, by the way, since at the last meeting, we were talking about the CAFR and the money in the wastewater fund. In my memory, according to the CAFR, the budget revenue was $3.9 million, not 3.4. So the line under the budget for last year was 3.9, and you're saying that it's going down from last year.
That is what the budget is saying, yeah.
Yeah, and you might remember me standing up here in June of last year indicating that we didn't need the 40% increase in the fee from the wastewater fund. But there was, I've looked at my tax bill. I guarantee you my sewer fee went up 40%. So if you use from the CAFR $3.9 million for last year, and you multiply that by 1.4 because of the 40% increase in the wastewater fees, you come up with $5.5 million, which I think is probably more representative. I mean,
Probably.
you look at what you got last year, you know you're going to get 40% more. So the budget should be roughly, assuming 40% across the board,
Yeah.
5.5 million. So that might be why you think you're at 100,
Yeah.
102%.
Looks a little off.
Yeah, it does. That's all I had.
Any
Thank
other
you.
public comment? Any other council comment?
I just had a real quick question, because you used the term adjusted budget. Just walk me through that process.
Anything that's not the original budget as approved is adjusted. We make adjustments from time to time if someone, maybe they're a little short in their professional services line item, so they can take some from miscellaneous tools and supplies. They may do that within their own budget. Then it becomes an adjusted budget because it's not the same as when it was originally adopted.
So is that a budget you bring back? You do not bring that?
They
No.
haven't been bringing it back.
No, on those type of budgets, we don't, because we're still within the confines and within what council has approved. If it's anything, budget adjustments, if we're raising a certain line item, trying to think of a good example. Do you have any, Mr. Spear? For something that we would bring back to council, if for whatever reason we get a grant and we come back to council so we can change the budget to account for that grant. If it's anything from fund to fund, then it comes back to council. If it's anything that increases the expenditures but does not have an offsetting revenue increase, we come back to council. Or if we have big items such as in August when we had to do a budget adjustment because our general fund wasn't balanced, that'll come back to council.
Well, in terms of an example of a larger, type of expenditure that we'd come back to council, we were discussing this today as far as what to put in the wastewater for expenditures for next year. Because this year, as you all know, our engineer's behind. We were supposed to actually have work as far as replacement of some of the sewer lines. Well, they are concluding their first section of lines that they want to replace. But John and I were discussing this. Well, how much do we want to put in the budget? Are we certain they're actually going to do the work next year? And the idea is that we've got two choices. We can either overestimate it, as Dr. Torres stated in the past, we're carrying money and we haven't spent it, or we can underestimate it. But if we underestimate it and the engineer actually finishes this portion of the design work and we let this out for bid and it comes back and say it's cost of $2.5 million to do the work, because as I understand it, the street that's the highest priority now is Church, but as well as Hallwood and Wilson and some of these others. But they come back and we don't have it in the budget, we haven't covered it, then we'd have to come back and do a request to amend the budget to appropriate the money from the wastewater reserve and add it to our budget, and then on the expenditure side, expend it for that particular project. And that would be an amended budget, not just an adjusted budget.
Okay. Would it ever constitute a time where we would go and have departments make adjustments?
Well, in cases
In their
where,
budgets?
if we were at this point in this year where we saw our revenues were not going to meet the target, or the expenditures for whatever reason were at a point that it was another issue with the county where they were going to hit us for 500 or hold back $500,000 or something like that, then we'd have to come to council to make budget actually budget adjustments or budget cuts, and that would take council action. You'd probably ask the various departments where and what can we cut. If it were drastic, like 5-6 years ago, we actually had to go to furloughs. I think there were layoffs. I mean, there's different things, and that would all have to come back to council. Yes, but at our mid-year, we're trying to keep it under control. So.
Could I make one additional comment, kind of in line with what Eddie was saying? Is if you look at page 11 and page 12, what the beginning balance was of the cash was 1.6 million, but then I would expect, because we're under budget 600 or more K this year, I would have expected that to go up to 2.2, but because we are 100K under revenue, that is less revenue than we thought, okay, maybe it's only 2.1, but down at the bottom of page 12, instead of being 2.1, we're at 1.3, so that's, I mean, I can understand why last year's expenditures would change things, but you're talking about a lot of money difference between what one would, based upon this year's cash flow, look like and what it's going. I mean, we're talking, $700,000-800,000 difference, which is not just chump change.
Yeah, we covered that. That's
looks like a
for the
lot
most
of
part,
money
it's the building
that
permits.
needs to be reconciled. I mean, I don't understand it. I'll be the first to.
But I think that's why we need to see the adjusted budget in September, October.
And we'll bring that whenever we have those rollover numbers.
Now, okay. So we realize we owe the county $400,000. Of course, next year, if they haven't billed us, 1 year rolls off, but then we got another year. So is that money in the budget to be paid?
It's in the expenditure side of the budget, yes, and anticipated for the balance with the revenue side.
Correct.
When we do those building permits and the money, are we billing even? Like we collect $100, they bill us $100? I mean, I know that's not correct, the numbers, but is it even?
They have their own formula, right? Yes. Yeah.
I think they bill us less than what we collect.
That's what I'm asking.
I think
Where
we
is the
make, we
difference?
make a little bit of money
We
on
do,
the building
administrative
permits.
fee.
At least
Okay.
I hope we would make a little money on
I
that.
would hope so, too.
Although they do cover some of our building department's salaries, is that correct?
That's correct.
So they're covering their salaries and they're not billing us for the, no wonder the counties,
Don't say it out loud. Somebody may record it. Nick, don't listen.
don't put that in the paper.
So Ty, is it safe if once we iron this out and we're operating and the numbers match and everything, we should not have any surprises with
Right.
with cutbacks in departments or
Correct. Yeah, we had the departments go through and evaluate their numbers. We looked through the revenues, made sure we did all of our forecasting and projections, and that's where we're at. And we're pretty good on revenue. We came in projected 100,000 less in a 14.1 million. Well, no, what was it? $13 million revenue. I mean, that's less 1% off.
so in the example, because he's the only one left here, Mr. Patton's responsibility of Parks and Recs, he should not be anticipating any cuts then.
No further cuts. No. This should be good through the end of the year, and then we'll talk about next year when we get to the budget. Okay.
Okay. Committee reports. City Oregon Services.
City Org hasn't met since the last meeting. They were meeting on the fourth Wednesday, so that'd be next Wednesday, wouldn't it?
Yep. Okay, infrastructure.
Infrastructure hasn't met since last meeting. We are meeting a week from tomorrow.
Ad hoc water, I do not think we're going to be meeting anymore because the only thing we are waiting for is a report on the changes that are going to be made at Denny's Park. Parks and Rec and Quality of Life,
No, we did not meet.
Ad hoc Youth.
No, we don't meet until the first part of the month, Madam Mayor.
Okay. The Action Committee,
We did meet on the 15th, and we talked about we got updates on the strategies as far as our school reports, as far as our neighborhood watch, and as far as our teen court. We talked about the things that are going on in reference to the fights that are going on with the minors in school, how they're dealing with them. We talked about the minor violations, how they're being handled in individual schools, and how the numbers are coming in, and also how it's also affecting teen court. We talked about our neighborhood watch, that we have not received any calls to establish any new groups. No issues at the time with the PAC. Volunteers are out all night doing surveillance and doing a lot of house checks, and graffiti has decreased, and that so that the public might know as well that if you're going on vacation, you might want to call the neighborhood watch, our police department, and have them patrol your house while you're on vacation. But when you get back, you must tell them that you're back in town, so they're not.
They might arrest you.
Yeah. If you have a house party like Mr. Spear has been known to have, so no, you are. So that and teen court is experiencing less volunteers and less referrals. You can look at it a couple ways that maybe the kids aren't getting in as much trouble. They've gotten an understanding of the responsibilities of the law and respecting the current conditions at the school, or you can look at it in reference to the school is upgrading their responsibilities and keeping the kids in check. And that was our action meeting.
other committees, boards, and commissions.
I do have a report. I met last Friday with representative of the Water District, representative of the base, in a conference call with our consultant for the salt nutrient management plan, and a member of Lahontan, Bruce, can't remember his last name, with Lahontan. Lahontan is expecting the salt nutrient management plan report in June, a preliminary plan. This report is going to cost approximately $50,000. Now, some of that goes to help the GSA. And the Water District said they are going to try to kick in some money towards that, but they think since this applies a lot to the sewer plant, that the city should be planning on kicking in some money on this report also. Exactly how much, it'll be less than 50, but I assume that would come out of the sewer fund since it applies to the...
That's correct. Matter of fact, the general manager of the Water District and I have met on that too. And I had mentioned that if he needs the money this budget year, I could take an item to council and ask for the money to be taken from, our portion of the money to be taken from the reserve.
He didn't know exactly how much the Water District should kick in. I don't think the base is kicking anything in, but their feeling was that since it applies to the sewer plant, that...
And I agree with that conclusion. Yeah.
Okay.
But if he gives me an amount and a time frame, I told him that I could take it back for this budget year and bring it back to council.
The Lahontan representative is coming down on the 21st of April and meeting with the technical advisory meeting at 10, and then meeting with the co-op groundwater meeting at 1. So just to let you know, he will be here. That's his tentative plan. And that was it.
Okay. The only one I have is the Air Pollution Control District, and our meeting was simply going over our audit report. There was no other action taken. And Eddie, did you have anything?
I was scheduled to go to the meeting with Mr. Parsons, the EA meeting, but I was under the weather unless Mr. Parsons would like to give us an update as to what we talked about.
The meeting was the East Kern EDC, or essentially East Kern Economic Development Group, and it was on tourism and tourism activities. We went through basically some of our, each city presented their current activities for tourism and what they're up to, and we saw some videos from all of actually almost every city except ourselves. We didn't have a video at that point. I'm still trying to get one together, as you guys know. But basically, they showed their videos of their community, their feel-good community videos, and then we talked about the petroglyph and some of the other activities we have going on for tourism. That was pretty much the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. We missed you.
I missed you.
Okay, city manager's report.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, there are three things I wanted to report. Well, one's a report, one's a request, and one's a comment. But in terms of report, I attended was it last week or the week before, but I attended the League of Cities Public Works Officers Institute, and they had some very good sessions. But there were two in particular that I attended that I want to report back to committees on. And one is on recycled water. They had a professor emeritus that seems to be an authority because they asked everyone in the room that wherever they went to college, used his textbook. He's written several textbooks, I guess, about water resources, water conservation, different things regarding water, to raise their hand, and I'd say 3/4 of the room had their hands up. Now, me being older, I obviously had textbooks from professors that were before his time. But anyhow, he presented both theoretical, and he's had a lot of practical research experience on recycled water, and he had a presentation on pros and cons. And then they had, at the same time, they had the Public Works Director for the city of Burbank, and they've been recycling water for about 40 years. And her presentation, the PowerPoint also, was on it was not just pros, cons, but she said the pitfalls. And so we have a practical perspective, and we have sort of a theoretical research perspective on recycled water. And as soon as those their PowerPoints are to be posted on the League of Cities website, and when that occurs, and if it occurs before infrastructure, if I can get copies of those, I'll do a mini presentation then on recycled water. And then another, it was kind of an interesting session because it was a series of 3 presentations, and it was entitled, "Do You Have Enough Fiber?" And I thought it might have to do with brand or something like that, but what it was about broadband. And it had 3 different perspectives also. It had the regional perspective, how do you bring broadband in if it doesn't exist in your particularly fiber optic cable. If it doesn't exist in your community, it was a regional perspective, and it was the County of Santa Cruz was presenting on that, or how they were able to link up with Silicon Valley, actually, to bring it into Santa Cruz. And then you had the city of San Leandro that provided what a city can do to assist as far as networking the broadband once it's there. So it was kind of a local perspective. And then the third one was Michael Ort of Praxis, who brought in Digital 95, and that particular PowerPoint is posted, but the other 2 aren't yet, and they're all to be posted. But his was the idea of the actual contractor that has to bring in and create the actual backbone and the importance of the backbone. And he actually had Digital 395 of one of his 2 examples in his PowerPoint presentation. And as soon as those are available, I believe with City Org is where I'd return, because I believe that's where the Broadband Committee is based. And then the other thing I had in terms of a request, at the month earlier, I attended the League of Cities City Manager Conference, and one of the hot topics, or one of the topics of discussion, was because of transparency, a lot of the cities are actually revising and their codes of conduct and their codes of ethics for that they, as far as for city councils and city council members and the various boards and commission members within the city. And so it was, I went to our city ordinance and our adopted policies and procedures, and we actually don't have a code of conduct or a code of ethics. And so my question is in the meantime, our city clerk has gone online, and she has, I think, provided me with maybe a half a dozen. And I wondered if you're interested in me bringing forward codes of conducts and codes of ethics, and whether you want it done at my election to go through half a dozen examples and create an example, or would you like to see examples that she's already provided me with and approach it from a comparative perspective of other cities, or would you like me to create a kind of a compiled draft for review?
I'd like to see both.
Yeah, I was going to say the very same
well,
thing.
Okay, I'll do this.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the ones you've got and then what you're
Yeah.
proposing.
Okay, I can do that. And the last thing was a comment. It was, I think, Councilman Wicknick, our former Councilman Wicknick, had mentioned the idea that backing in, give them a dollar amount and they back in a budget. And it's just a comment that things changed in the mid-'90s, and the state directed all money that would used to come directly to local governments for transportation to either go through the MPOs or the RTPAs, which in our case is KernCog. And the problem I've always had when they did that is because when I was with Tulare County running the design and their transportation operations, we would always hold that close to the vest. When we had some of our projects were 8-9 miles, 4-lane FAS roadway, and we had hold it very close to the vest what our engineer's estimate was, because we wanted to get very competitive bids. And that money, that amount that we had available, we didn't release. We didn't tell the contractor, well, we estimate it's going to be this much, and our budget is this much. And instead, we'd get very competitive bids, and when they're under our engineer's estimate, that's what we would award them for. Well, what I found since I've been here and involved in the new process where our money actually comes for the RTIP, STIP, FTIP, CMAQ, you name it, comes from KernCog, they publish what our programmed amounts are. And what I'm finding is contractors know that. This is public information. They can go to KernCog website. They know how much money we have to spend. So I don't think they really give us competitive bids. They just try and figure how much lower than I have to be than the next contractor to actually get the award. Not how much does it actually cost me. It's always bothered me, but I just am adding that as a comment because of what the councilman said, and that's in effect what's happening. These contractors know how much we have, and so they just want to know how low they probably could be to take as much as they could of the money we have, programmed for a particular project. That's just a comment. That's all. Thanks.
Can I ask you one quick question, Mr. Spear? And maybe you can or can't answer the question. It has to do with the broadband and there's a gentleman that's talking about bringing in a tower, and
He already did, yeah.
he already did?
Yeah.
Is that are those two entities going to be able to work together in reference to what you learned in the class, sir?
It's possible because I guess the premise behind this, the idea from the local perspective is try. I mean, you're supposed to work cooperatively. I mean, that's the whole premise in the idea. But I'm not aware of anything that's been proposed outside of the broadband committee at this time. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm obviously aware of the article of the expenditures that are proposed by Mediacom, and I've had discussions with a representative from Mediacom at this point. I'm also aware, but it's hearsay, about at least one other endeavor in town in as far as in increasing the capacity of the broadband capability in town.
Okay, mayor and city council comments.
So I have a few things. Mr. Spear, I noticed that our crews are out putting down paint.
Oh, yes, and I haven't forgotten you.
Okay, just want to know how striping on downs, the time frame on that. The Horton landscaping, have we done anything on that yet?
No, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is I found out that the city's never accepted that. That's still the responsibility of the developer. And I had asked our staff to contact Horton to take care of that particular problem up on that property.
But we've started collecting tax money for that.
Yeah.
For the landscaping development,
Yeah.
but they have not accepted that. That's correct. We have not accepted their that area.
How can we start collecting tax money for it if we haven't accepted it?
Because they're required to form that district, but they just haven't complied with our requirements for us to be able to accept what they've put in at this time. But they're required, with the approval of their final map, they're required to have formed a landscaping lighting district.
And they haven't presented that to us?
The final map has been recorded.
Right.
The issue is that all the improvements have not been constructed and accepted. Bill Horton, or rather the new developer, is Stephen Hare, and Mr. Hare is currently constructing the rest of the street improvements, which would also include the landscaping that was constructed.
So he's still responsible for all the weeds on
Yes, I've called Mr. Hare and informed him that there's some disrepair out there, weeding necessary, and I went out there today to inspect, and I've noticed that they have started reconstructing or taking care of some of the damaged areas as well as weeding.
because I drove by there a couple days ago, and that one tree is going to fall over any day.
Yeah,
Yep.
they've just started. He was notified, I'm going to say, a week and a half ago of things being in disrepair.
Okay.
And so apparently he's just now got his contractor out there to start taking care of his landscape.
Okay. I have one other.
And there was one other thing I was going to get back to you on, and that is, you were talking about that, I guess the surcharge from that storm drain there on College Heights.
Yes.
That's really a bubble up, and it actually is a storm drain that's truncated. In other words, it picks up flows from south of Kendall. It picks up flows from the developed part of the Horton track, and it discharges them. That's a discharge. It actually terminates there, and that's a bubble up. That's not a drain that collects water.
No, I knew it wasn't a drain that
okay,
collects
all right.
water because water's coming out.
Exactly.
Water's coming out and running all the way down College Heights Boulevard.
It's very similar to the bubble ups we have here in California, where we cross the street. A lot of people think those are storm drains. Well, it does take the water in on the west side, but it bubbles up again.
But that water's got to be coming from somewhere.
It's coming from the built up area south of Kendall, and then through, and is collected there in the Horton tract as well.
So it's got to be sprinkler runoff then.
Oh, I thought you were talking about when it was just gushing out during the rains.
No, I'm talking about
No, that would-
when it's running out
Yeah,
and there's
it's
no
all the
rain.
time.
That's true. It would have
So
to be,
there, I mean, I've been up there. I've gone up there and seen water all the way down to whatchamacallit's track,
that,
and it hasn't rained in a week.
it would have to be nuisance water from the tracks.
Okay, we approved item 4 today on the consent calendar. Do we have a time frame on the West Drummond widening and reconstruction?
This is the Drummond project
Yes.
west of Downs. What is our time frame on that?
We're currently in application to Caltrans for our permit to construct, our E76. Once we get our permission to go ahead and construct, we can advertise. We are currently ready with 100% complete plans and specifications. All we're waiting on is Caltrans authorization to allow us to go out to bid.
And we have to have Caltrans approval because it's federal money?
Yes, we cannot advertise until we have authorization.
Okay. What about, we also have an East Drummond project that we've talked about months ago, the dip.
Oh, they're by the shopping center
Yeah,
east of China Lake Boulevard. We've been having the soils
We have a
issues.
off that has done the geotechnical investigation, and we are also asking the Navy to see if they have historical data on aerial photos to help identify any of those trash dumps, such that we can positively or be able to approximate the area of reconstruction.
Okay. Yeah, my daughter drives now, so I don't have to drive over that dip every day. Pardon? It's fun, yeah. You get through the dip on China Lake Boulevard, then you hit the dip on Drummond. We often get quoted about the municipal code. I'd like to see the municipal code on a council agenda so we can kind of discuss it and see what options we have. Okay?
We can certainly do that.
Thank you. And the last item, after I attended that salt nutrient meeting Friday, I had the ability to attend the bike path ribbon cutting along with my two esteemed colleagues here. Mick was very complimentary to the city in our help and willingness to let him put that in, although it's on county property. It's a beautiful addition, I think, to the community. We had a real good turnout at the ribbon cutting, and I just, sometimes we think that the county thinks we're a stepchild, but I think that's a good example of some money they've spent over here that will really benefit the community. And there's a lot of, if you drive up College Heights and look, there's a lot of people using that right now, both walkers and joggers and bikers and girls pushing their baby carts and stuff. So anyway, I just think it's great, and I'm glad to be here, even if it is an hour later than the clock shows.
Oh, really? Okay. Eddie?
This question is probably for Mr. Colt and maybe Mr. Spear. I was coming out of the bank last week, and there was a group of people that were helping a lady up from a wheelchair. And right on that sidewalk south of Rite Aid there's a light pole there where the sidewalk is at. And when I ran over, when we was over talking to her what happened, she said she tried to go around it, and there wasn't enough room with her in her wheelchair, and she ended up falling off the curb into Ridgecrest Boulevard traffic. Do you know if that light is there? Because it doesn't appear to be the requirements to meet the ADA, sir. Do you know it?
No, but we can investigate.
Okay. So you know where I'm talking about, right? By that backflow device is that on?
Where the traffic controller is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's right at the corner.
No, right, not right at the corner. Maybe about 20 yards, 30 yards east of that. Right where Rite Aid is at.
I know where Rite Aid.
And then there's a backflow device that's sitting right there. And it's a sidewalk, and there's a street light that's right in the middle of that sidewalk.
Okay. Where's it from the restaurant, Mexican restaurant?
It's back towards China Lake Boulevard.
Okay. All right. Should be the only street light in between there.
It is, sir. Yes, sir. It's right adjacent to the backflow devices.
Honorable Mayor, may I?
Please.
Yes, I have very intimate knowledge of that condition there. The condition that we found is that there was insufficient right-of-way dedicated for that Rite Aid project. If you notice that the sidewalk there is very narrow, it does not comply to the city standards of a 6-foot commercial-wide sidewalk. For whatever reason, when that project was constructed or conditioned, there wasn't additional right-of-way required from them. What we found is a constraint at that point. We went ahead and installed the light, the street light, knowing that we would have to come back and acquire additional right-of-way to accomplish a fully ADA compliant walk around or access around that light pole. But there was a right-of-way constraint there. It was the problem.
Mr. Cope, would we be responsible in any kind of way legally? And thank God nothing happened because no traffic was coming, because she fell actually into Ridgecrest Boulevard, but no cars were coming. Her wheelchair just went right into it. Would we be responsible if something had happened?
I wouldn't be able to speak to responsibilities or the legal aspects
We don't
of
want to
that.
answer that, Eddie, in public.
I understand that, but I don't want us to.
No, they need to look into it.
Right. Is it something that's on an urgency or no, sir?
Well, sir, we are doing what you approved tonight was a transition plan for the CDBG funds.
Okay.
And the project area is between China Lake Boulevard, Downs, Las Flores, and Upjohn.
So it's
and a targeted area will be
Okay.
the Ridgecrest Boulevard area.
Okay.
And there are funds going to be, as a part of that CDBG grant, for doing actual improvements. And it is very likely that we will target and prioritize Ridgecrest Boulevard for making many of those driveways and sidewalk sections ADA compliant. At least that is the anticipation at this point.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was all I had.
That's all. I have a few. I'd like to have another sewer workshop. Dr. Rotora sent over many questions. I thought he brought up some good points. And Dennis, you said that you had gotten new information. I'd like to, it's great that if it goes to committee, but I would like the whole city council to be able to look at those, answer his questions again.
Well, I have forwarded to the consultant the analysis that Dr. Rotora has provided, and they're in the process of providing answers to that.
Okay, well, we'd
I
be able to.
I wouldn't think a workshop would be necessary for that analysis.
Something that's formal enough so we can get all the questions answered?
Well, I mean, we can do that, but the point is if we're talking about, we had a consultant, and the consultant was paid money for their particular analysis, and I think that they conducted a workshop, and as my recollection that they answered all the questions that were asked at that particular point in time relative to our project and relative to the timeline that we've established for our project. In other words, the next action steps following the workshop was the completion of the EIR, because their certification of the EIR is what needs to happen prior to us being able to approach Lawton with an application for the project, and prior to our ability to apply for a state revolving fund, loan for that particular project.
Okay, so don't call it a workshop. Call it an item on the agenda where his questions can be answered, and some that we have. After reading what he had, I'd like to know where his analysis is incorrect. I'd like to know that the questions he asked were, and the answers he posed were not valid. And so if they are, we need to look at it and see. And so if it's an item, I don't care what you call it, an item on the agenda then.
Well, I think perhaps a better item, and rather than bringing the consultant out here for the purposes of addressing Dr. Rotora's analysis, I think it would be better for him to respond to the analysis which I've already requested, and let you all review a copy of their particular response. And if you think at that time it's warranted,
Okay.
then we can.
All right,
then
I'll
we can
accept
do
it that way. I just thought there was a lot of things that were important that I didn't feel had been covered when our consultant was here.
Two different issues. One was the analysis on just the flow rates and the necessary amount of sewage that needed to be treated. The other one was the set of comments. They're two separate inputs, and I think maybe you're talking cross purposes there with regard to
Okay.
the same. I don't think you're talking about the same thing.
Well, our initial response, because we've already had an initial response from our consultant, and he said he'd be glad to address all your technical questions, which are your flow rates. But he said your comments also deal with policy issues and legal issues. And he said those he couldn't address. Those would have to be addressed by, we'd have to bring in our attorney to address some of your questions, and we'd have to, and other issues are policy related.
Yeah, I would agree. There were several, in fact, he talked to me after the meeting and said, I can't answer these.
I'd like to have those answers. So thank you. I appreciate however we accomplish them. Also, there's been a lot of discussion in the newspapers, both on the News Review and the Daily Independent, on our water fountain. For about the 14th time we've talked, and I'm trying not to sound facetious here, but we have discussed this water fountain, that it uses 22,145 gallons a year, and that is about the amount of one swimming pool. People have said, I've tried to defend and I think we all have tried to defend the water that we're using on our parks to serve our constituents and all of the young men and women who are using the parks for games and for just items that make the city of Ridgecrest a better place to be. But the fountain, I cannot justify saying it serves a purpose other than it looks nice. So for that reason, I would like us to put the water fountain on the agenda and see whether it can be, I even said, even if we just put dirt in it for now, take the motors out, at some point in time we get through this water crisis, and put dirt in it or whatever, and use the petroglyphs that we have, the petroglyphic art we have around the community, and put it in there. We have been chastised over and over again that everyone else has to do this kind of conservation, and the city thinks, I think the term was, they were arrogant enough to assume that they didn't have to do it. So I'd like us to look at that. I don't think it amounts to a hill of beans, except it does save 22,145 gallons a year, and that is something we need to do, and I think it's appropriate that we say, does it serve any purpose? So I'd like to have that on the agenda so we can direct staff on that.
May I propose that the article I read today said that the state is going to be surveying in April the snowpack, and we possibly will be declared out of the drought. And they're talking about maybe lifting the restrictions. I don't know of any citizens that have filled in their pools to save the 22,000
No,
gallons.
I don't think they have either. I understand.
So
I just want it to be on the agenda so we can make
discuss it and get yelled at.
yeah, so we can.
Is that something, Peggy, that Parks and Rec present something to us? I mean, what are we going to discuss?
Whether we should be turned off and how.
Don't we need their input, though?
I think we do. That's why I'm asking for it to be on the agenda. Okay, the other thing I would like to ask for is thank you, was the municipal code. Thank you for putting it up. I don't know how many of you, I sent a letter to staff regarding rats inside the city of Ridgecrest. I don't know how many of you have seen that or heard about it, but there's been, I have a friend who had 3 rats in his attic. They were about this big, and I had one down in a house that I own in Ridgecrest Heights, that they were jumping from the palm trees, and literally they were the size of large cats. The tail on one of them had to be that long. People have said that they are in Heritage Village. The lady that sent us a letter said she sees there's a lot of them in Heritage Village. What can we do? I don't think there's anything the city is responsible to do to prevent rats, but I know that I've heard of 3 different incidences. And is there anything we can say to those people? I said, talk to your homeowners association. Is there anything we can do? Is it a prevalent problem? Is it
Sounds
just?
like public health
Yeah.
issue.
Okay. I will tell her to call the public health department.
A matter of fact, I think it's very similar to that beetle infestation. I believe the county ag commissioner probably can give advice on that too.
I sent him, David de Havilland, I sent her his name and address. But I do know, I've talked to Staffords, and they say they've had numerous calls about them. So, anyhow, that's all I have.
Who's breeding them?
Who's what?
Who's breeding the rats? I mean, they have to be coming
Well,
from somewhere.
originally, I don't want to name a company, but the comment was made by somebody who lives in Heritage Village who wasn't, that the boxes that have been coming in and being unloaded in some company around town may have brought these rats into the community, and that big company there by Heritage Village is where because they all seem to be in Heritage Village. The major complaints is what Mrs. Ferguson told me. So if anybody hasn't heard about it, then God bless you. I hope you don't see them. But I saw the tail. I didn't see the animal. I saw the tail on mine.
Scary, huh?
It was, like I say, it was about the tail. No, it was probably about that long because the animal was about that long.
Gee.
So, no, very skinny little tail. Anyhow, that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything?
Now let's go home.
Motion to adjourn.
Do it.
So move. Let's do it. We're done. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for staying. Thank you, sir, for putting up with me.